Hi, everyone. This is Sam Collins, your coding and billing expert for acupuncture for the American Acupuncture Council Information Network. And thank you for spending some time with us today. And as always, we hope we're giving you some information to help enhance and increase your practice. As always, brought to you by the American Acupuncture Council. Again, my email here, if you want to go to the slides, my email is my name, Sam, at aacinfonetwork.com. And we're always here to make a little bit of help for you, whether it's seminars, our network program, and so forth. But today's program, let's talk a little bit about just standards and practices, but specifically policies relating to cash, insurance, and how they comply. And one of the things we always have to make sure is that we always have a compliance in our office. Well, part of that compliance is, how do we really combine? How do we really work with a practice that does both? Can I have a practice that does cash and insurance? Are they mutually exclusive? Is it worth it even doing it? I would certainly say having a practice that does a little bit of both is probably to your best advantage, because I want patients that can come into me. Whether they're going to have insurance, whether they're going to have cash, I want to see them. The difference I want to discuss today, though, is can I have a difference in price? Can we do anything that makes it potentially more attractive for a cash patient? Can I give a cash discount? And that's really what I want to hit on. Is there an ability to do a discount? Well, here's something we all know. The National Institutes of Health indicated, and they did a study that revealed coverage patterns for acupuncture specifically are not as good. Well, I don't think they so much needed to do a study. They probably could have called any acupuncturist, and we certainly could have told them about that. That being said, here's what the data suggests. Data suggests that Americans are increasingly willing to pay out of pocket for acupuncture. Specifically, obviously when it's not covered by insurance. Since it's not covered, they're more used to it. So again, that's what the study shows. So since people are willing to pay out of pocket, of course, many acupuncturists say, hey, I'm going to do a practice that does all cash, which is certainly your right to do. But I would just suggest, if you have an insurance patient, what can we do with insurance that's different from cash? Can we give a discount? Now, here's where I want to be careful. Often people will say, I'm giving a cash discount. In fact, I would argue, and I will state to you, you really don't give a cash discount, but you potentially can give a prompt pay discount. But before we start even with that, let's talk about waiving. And one thing we want to be careful is waiving fees, waiving amounts, waiving deductibles. So take a look here. Here's what it says by the Office of Inspector General. Waiving copayment, coinsurance, and deductible. If a physician's office routinely fails to collect the patient's portion of care, it's considered a violation of both the Anti-Kickback Statute and False Claims Act. Now, what does this mean? If I bill an insurance $100 and the patient has a deductible and I do not collect it, it's a false claim because I've billed money that I'm not intending to collect. And so bear in mind that that's where this issue of a false claim comes in. It's also potentially considered a kickback, because if you're waiving a patient's deductible, it's like you've given them that money. So now here I want to highlight again one more thing that it says here in that first sentence: if a physician's office routinely fails to collect. So notice here where it talks about down here, and I'll point to it, but they also recognize when a physician makes a reasonable effort to collect from a patient. So for instance, you bill an insurance, but the patient simply doesn't pay the rest. You're not going to be in trouble for that. Obviously, you're going to do the best you can to collect, but no one's ever going to force you that if you didn't at least do a reasonable attempt to collect. If you didn't, it's not the issue. The key here is routine waiver. Please be sure. Obviously, when patients have insurance, sometimes they just don't make the payment or we have other issues, but the routine waiver is going to be an issue. Here's what we want to focus on. Can we give any type of discount? Well, in most states, the answer is no. There's no discount when it comes to paying cash. However, what it says from the Office of Inspector General, and specifically from the OIG Opinion 0803, it says, following a broad guideline, they okayed a 5 to 15% prompt payment. Now, I want to be clear. This is not cash. It's basically pay at the time of service. Now, obviously, that could be cash, but it could be a check, be a credit card. So realize it's payment at time of service. What they okayed is 5 to 15%. And in my opinion, I think that does make sense, because it does cost money and time to bill insurance. By the time you fill out a claim form, verify insurance, send the claim, wait for payment, adjust the claim, send the patient, it's turned out that 5 to 15% of the money that you collect went to administrative. So with this prompt pay, what you're doing is passing along a bookkeeping savings. In other words, because you do not have to bill insurance, you're saving yourself the time and effort, whether it's you or staff, to billing, and you're giving them 5 to 15%. So what you want to think of, is it defensible? Is it an actual bookkeeping? What if you said, hey, I got a cash price that's $50, but insurance price is $100? That would be unreasonable. And the reason it is it doesn't cost $50 to bill insurance. I will certainly say it takes extra time and effort, but it doesn't cost double. So always think of keeping it fair and reasonable. So charging 5 to 15% more or discounting 5 to 15% for someone paying cash is certainly reasonable. And again, I want to emphasize, I said the word cash, but do keep in mind what it really is prompt pay. Pay me today. So keep that in mind. However, there's always hardships. Hardships are a whole different issue. You might have a patient with a hardship that they may pay you nothing. They come in, they can't afford it, but you want to help them. You're a healthcare provider. There's nothing wrong with you going ahead and doing that service for free or at a very discounted rate. Hardships are always acceptable, but do make sure that it's a legitimate hardship. Obviously, you'll see here some talk of you have to verify their tax returns. I would say keep it reasonable to understand that and have them sign a document where they understand that it is a hardship. Then that way we have no issue with them coming into allowing there to be an issue of them saying you've cheated the system. The key issue here is if you've given someone a hardship, please make sure that the hardship price is the receipt they are given. Don't give a patient a hardship and then in turn have a receipt that shows your regular price where they may submit to insurance. If they're getting a hardship, everyone else gets a hardship, meaning anyone else that's going to pay that bill. But hardships are acceptable and don't be afraid to do them. Now, some states do allow a very broad allowance of a discount. So I'll give an example for anyone that's in California, and I'm not doing this to entice you to move to California, but you'll see here it says California Business and Professions Code 657, and this is what the law says. I'm going to blow it up a little bit. It says here, to encourage the prompt payment of health or medical care claims, healthcare providers are hereby expressly authorized to grant discounts in health or medical care claims when payment is made promptly within the time limits prescribed by the provider. So what they're referring to here is that it's a prompt pay, but it's the prompt pay that you decide in California. So in other words, it doesn't have to be paid at the time of service as it would in most states. But the other interesting part for California is the allowance they have. So take a look here. Any discounted fee granted pursuant to this section shall not be deemed the healthcare provider's usual, customary, or reasonable fee for any other purpose, not limited to any healthcare service plan. So in other words, in California, when someone doesn't have insurance and paying cash, you can charge them a price that could be very different from their health insurance price or your health insurance price. Now, bear in mind, that's a California only rule. That's not in any other state. The only other state that has something like that is Minnesota, that has kind of the same rule. Be careful, know your state. In most states, the discount can be for prompt pay in 5 to 15%. But keep this in mind. You're going to bill a fair fee for service. Whether your insurance pays for it or the patient pays for it, I want the fee. Insurance billing is a little bit of a hassle, so I will certainly say it appears to me to be reasonable to give a small discount for pay at time of service and charge a little bit slightly more, but be careful of making it where it appears that you're cheating the system. In my opinion, that's really where you want to look. So California's got a pretty nice rule for this, but what do we do also beyond just the pay at time of service? There is something that we call concierge, or sometimes you'll hear as retainer agreements. These are the states that allow retainer agreements, and these are the ones that I can definitively say do. However, most states will usually allow a retainer, and what that retainer means is that the patient has bought a set number of services. So I want to be very careful here to make sure that you understand that. Please take a look at your own state, but here's the basic rules of these retainer agreements. In other words, it's a prepayment for services. So what does prepay mean? It's a payment for a set number of visits. So for instance, in Maryland, this is allowed, and they allow you to sell a number of visits to a patient, and those visits can be at a cheaper rate. So instead of maybe $100 a visit, if you buy 10, maybe you sell them for $800. The issue here is that it must be a set number of visits. It cannot be for a period of time. You can't say get unlimited visits for a month for a set number of dollars, but it has to be a set number of services. In addition, there must be no expiration. You can't tell the patient they have to use it within a certain time. You can encourage it, but you cannot force that. In addition, there must be a refund policy for unused. So if a person buys 10, they could certainly use them all right away, or they might use them over a few months. But if they don't use them all, and they want to no longer come in, it is their right to seek a refund, and they get a prorated refund. So in other words, if I pay $500 for 10 visits and I only use 5, the patient gets refunded $250 or what they didn't use. Realize this contract can be rescinded by either side, as long as you put it in the contract with the patient, but make sure it's a return of money. Realize that don't play games. If a patient doesn't want to continue care, don't fight with them. Most patients who buy prepay really like you. They want to come in, they just understand the value. And since they know they're coming for a lot of visits, certainly something that you may allow. I would in fact encourage, potentially might be something a family wants to purchase, that several family members can use the visits. This is generally not allowed for insurance reimbursement. And specifically in the state of Oregon, they don't allow for insurance reimbursement. So if a patient comes in and uses this, please make sure they're aware they cannot submit to their insurance company for it. But in some states, they might. So bear in mind, if they do, the patient's receipt will only reflect the amount that they paid. So when they come in, if you buy 10 for $1,000, each time they come in, you could give them a receipt for $100 for the visit to bill insurance. You can give a simple receipt for the amount they paid, but as far as reimbursement, it has to be prorated. The other factor that you may run into here is that some states may require the money be placed in a trust account. And typically in the state of Texas and Florida, this may be the case. So if you're in those states, please verify, and in any state verify, whether or not they allow you to hold the money. In other words, they want it in a trust so that way, if something happens to you, the patient's money is still available, so that way they could be refunded should you not be able to complete the care. I think this is a viable way for patients who understand healthcare, that want to have health and more of a supportive care. So I think this could be a nice way of allowing you to have a difference. Again, can you have a large cash discount at the beginning of care? No, but you can give a 5 to 15% prepay, or excuse me, prompt pay. But what if they prepay visits? Now, the prepay visits don't have the 5 to 15% reduction. Here it's allowed to be any amount you want, but again, make sure that it's fair and that there's a refund policy. My best to you to continued success, please take a look. Go to our website. It's www.aacinfonetwork.com. Take a look at all our services. We have upcoming programs for you. Our goal is to continue to make you successful. All our programs are continuing education. They're certified for additional hours, and we want you to be successful, and I wish you the best. Next week's host will be Virginia Duran. Thanks again.